Carol, I'm so excited to be sharing the stage, if you will, with you this evening. Carol was actually my art professor in college, so this is going to be a lot of fun, I think. So, Carol, we're talking about Henri Matisse this evening,
Mhm.
and my understanding is he was studying law and never intended to become an artist. Can you tell us a little bit about his
Right.
background?
Unlike a lot of other artists who, since they were little, they wanted to paint or sculpt or whatever, Matisse he had actually passed his exams, his law exams, and he was working as a clerk in a law office. And he came down with appendicitis when he was about 21. And that changed everything. While he was convalescing, his mother gave him some paints and learn how to paint on your own kind of book. And a year later, he left his law, ambitions, put them aside, and enrolled in art school. Before that, I forgot to say, he was born in northern France to a pretty prosperous family and in 1869. And it was a huge disappointment to his father when he gave up his law career and turned to art,
I guess we've
which,
all disappointed our
well,
parents at various times in our lives.
well, fortunately or unfortunately, the family did get a lawyer because his younger brother became a
Mm.
lawyer. But it was, like it is for a lot of artists today. It's not a secure income. So he had his ups and downs financially. He had a family to support. But anyway, so what's amazing though is he went to a couple different art schools. At first, he went to the very conservative art school, but then he changed to a more avant-garde kind of school, and that's where he met a lot of his contemporaries that we've actually heard about. And just, I guess it was 6 or 7 years later, he exhibited this painting on the left at the National Juried Salon, which was a really prestigious venue, very hard to be accepted into, and that's really quite amazing. So, whereas his early work was very much like the conservative realist sorts of paintings, where you can't really see the brushstrokes, you can see the influence of Impressionism, which had, was all the rage when he was going to school, and then Post-Impressionism with the loose brushstrokes and the bright subject, and also the subject itself. The Impressionists and Post-Impressionists, they weren't really painting war scenes or political kinds of paintings, or they were choosing to paint everyday scenes. So this would have been, every day in his life. And we'll come back to this one later because we'll see throughout his life, his he his style becomes looser and simplified, and he flattens the space. Here he is in his studio, and he's had several famous quotes. Um, so one of his most famous is he wanted to create an art of balance or purity and serenity, devoid of troubling or depressing subject matter, an art which would be something like a good armchair in which to rest from physical fatigue. So he and other painters, he didn't want, they weren't doing painting to be cathartic, to express, some inner turmoil. They really wanted to create art that would, be light and refreshing and consoling.
What we need this time
Right,
of
right.
year.
What we
Yeah,
always need.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So photography actually freed artists. It was before it was around the time Impressionism began that photography became more and more popular, and painters thought they were going to go out of business because painters, their job before photography was to document all the landscapes, all the famous people, all the houses, all the sort of things we take pictures of now. But what happened is it freed artists. So they started to explore things like color and balance and design, and they really moved away from realism. And So these particular pieces he did from life. The same model served for both the painting and the sculpture. He was a sculptor, a painter, also a printmaker. Um, and yeah, so his career followed kind of the movement of toward abstraction.
So whenever you're talking about abstraction, he's eliminating some of those details and simplifying things. Can you talk a little bit about what his favorite subjects were?
Okay, well, usually, well, almost always, he had recognizable subjects, but there were some favorite themes. For instance, on the left, we see the model facing him, which was actually very much influenced by what Cezanne had done with the frontal poses. But then you see him in the background there in this mirror reflection. He did a lot of paintings like this of the model in the studio. And then this is another favorite theme where he opened the windows and you see in very loose brush strokes and very bright colors, the interior of the room, but then beyond you see what looks like a harbor with boats. So it's almost like a painting in a painting.
Mm-hmm.
And these are two themes which he um, returned to often.
Whenever you're talking about that, what kind of influences did he have as he was painting throughout his life?
Well, I mentioned that he was friends with lots of other artists. He also traveled a lot and and visited museums. So he knew what was happening historically. He knew contemporary what movements were, and plus he was, trying to make a living. So he knew what was selling. He was able to actually attract early on some American collectors who lived in Paris at the time, and they were supportive to him and to many other artists, like the Cohn sisters, who donated a lot of their collection to the Baltimore Museum of Art. They were big collectors. But this on the left, we see one of Cezanne's paintings. Now, Cezanne was painting from memory, whereas Matisse started painting from live models, but eventually he abandoned live models and also started to paint from memory or based on his other paintings. So we see Cezanne's Bathers, which he finished in 1905, and then around the same time, now this is Matisse's Luxury, Calm, and Voluptuousness. And so we have some of the themes that we'll see a lot are the reclining female figure. That goes back even to before the Renaissance, but that was always a popular theme of his. And the dabs of paint are very much like the post-impressionists, but what the post-impressionists taught a lot of artists at the time is in science. Scientists were studying color theory, and they discovered that if you put complements together like red and green or purple and blue, that the purple looks more purple. Actually, it'd be purple and yellow. The yellow looks more yellow. And so the pointillists did this with little teeny dabs of paint. But what Matisse did, he's using larger dabs of paint. And we'll see those dabs get larger and larger. And eventually, he joins a group of painters who were using this very bold color, and they end up being called the wild beast, which is fauve in France, and they embraced that. The fauve style only lasted a few years, but it was very influential. Let's see. Oh yeah, so here are two portraits of his wife done in this fauve style. First, he did the one on the left, and the one on the right is the more famous. And these were in an exhibit with some of his fellow artists who were also sculptors. And so a critic had said, Donatello among the wild beasts. And that's how they got the title fauve. Donatello was a famous Renaissance sculptor. But so the fauve style, they're using complementary colors. Here you see the red and green together, and again, the purple and yellow. They wanted the bold colors, but they also wanted to make a painting. They're not making a copy of reality. And they also, in addition to studying European art, they were studying African art and oceanic art.
I think
And
that's why we have this little
right.
mask in front of
So
us here.
I actually brought a
we're gonna-
couple things from Cameroon. I have a pretty big African
Pass
art
it around.
collection. And you can see how the form is very simplified and certain parts are exaggerated. And so they felt free to do that. We'll see a sculpture coming up that shows that. So yeah, he wasn't trying to capture the personality of his wife. She could have just been a bowl of fruit. I mean, it was just an excuse for making a painting, you know?
Everyone wants to be called a bowl of fruit.
Yeah. So on the left, we have his Joy of Life. Again, we see the reclining nude figures and then some dancing figures in the background. And he often went back to these same subjects. We'll see them again and again. And then on the right, he sculpted this reclining figure. And supposedly he used this reclining figure to, inspire these reclining figures. But he did a lot of women in different poses, but especially the reclining figure they call odalisque. He did a lot of these odalisque paintings. And they sold, people like that. So just to compare now, we saw the earlier dinner table done in 1897, and then not so long after, we come to this. It's the same subject, but quite different. We see it's really a flattened space. Oh, what's interesting about this one on the right, though, it's called Harmony in Red. It was actually called Harmony in Blue. And he sold the painting and then decided he had to have it back. He asked for it back, and then he painted over all the blue and made it red. And
So they got two Matisses for one.
Right. So artists are always wondering, when is my painting finished? And usually you think, well, once it's sold, but not with Matisse, So anyway, but the space is very flat. You see a little bit of depth here, with the window, a little bit of perspective, but it's, the tablecloth is the same color as the wall, and the kind of arabesque plants are, going up. You don't really sense that they're going around an edge here. And of course, the woman is much more simplified. We don't see, many shadows. And again, that's the trajectory of his work. Now, this one on the left and right were commissioned for a Russian for his house. This was the first one on the left. And so you remember these dancing figures? Well,
I do, from class.
Right. Well, actually, they say they were inspired by folk art dances and by Greek pottery, but whatever reason, we saw it in his, was it The Joy of Life? I forget now, the one we just looked at.
Yes.
But so, and they're very large. Look, it's like 12 feet by 8 feet. Usually when we do paintings, we're doing small ones, but lots of these famous people, they do very, very large pieces. So they're very simplified. You don't really see much shadow at all. And again, that's the direction that he's going.
So my understanding is Matisse had contemporaries throughout his life that influenced him, and I think it's a proverb about iron sharpening iron, and I think he maybe had that back and
Right.
forth with Picasso. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, he and Picasso, in some books they say that they didn't like each other, but they actually were very good friends, but they were very competitive. So Picasso would do something. Picasso did a series of portraits here on the left, and then you see how there was several steps in between, but then the final one looks very cubist. And so then Matisse did this. He started with a live, he had a live model on the left, and then it gradually simplified. This is where you see really that African mask I'm passing around, some of that influence. And so they were always trying to one up one another, which is a good thing. If you have friends you're competing with, that's a good thing. It makes you, go that extra mile. And
So we will be having a 50-yard dash
yeah.
after the program tonight.
Well, we have the contest, don't we? The painting contest.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, competition is a good thing. You want to be, let's see, a little fish in a big pond, not a big fish in a little pond. Okay, so this shows more of the influence of Cubism. And this is probably one of Matisse's most Cubist works, but you can still see there's a figure in the background. It's still an interior. And then you see another figure at the piano. But the space is very, very flattened, but the subject is still recognizable. And people like Matisse influenced Cubism. When Cubism started with Picasso and Braque, they were doing all monochromatic. And then lots of other artists started to paint in this style, but they were using color. And then eventually Braque and Picasso start, using color. So it's really this intermix of influences. Now, this is his famous large reclining nude, also called the pink nude. And he really struggled when he was painting to simplify. You wouldn't really think that because he doesn't really want you to see the struggle, but I'm just going to advance really quick. He photographed this painting in 22 photographs as he was working on it. So it started off, oops, where's my arrow? Oh, here we go. It started off looking like this. So you see there's, a little bit of perspective here. The face is different. In fact, the face changes several times. And what he's doing, if you go all the way to here, he has made the background a grid, which flattened the space. He changed proportions. So he's painting, he's thinking about balance, symmetry, color, he's making a painting. He's not making a copy of reality.
So my understanding is Matisse had quite a long career in painting. How did Matisse work later in life?
Well, later in life, he was often bedridden, but he kept working, and he couldn't really paint anymore, so he started painting paper. I'm guessing they really he didn't have access to a lot of colored paper like we do, so he painted the paper, then he cut it out, and then he had an assistant who would, tack it up for him. Sometimes he would lay it out on a table. And so what he's doing is collage. And again, it was Picasso who was the first to incorporate and brought paper into their paintings. So they were the first collage artists. What Matisse is doing, he's not starting with a painting, he's just using the cutout paper. And so sometimes he would draw, there's like a bit of charcoal on the end of this pointer here. So he would draw what he wanted, and then he would cover it with paper. This, though, we're actually going to see coming up, he actually left it like that. But so he was really known for his collages, and it was this natural progression toward simplification. Oh, so let's go to that. Yeah, so here's a chapel. One of his assistants became a Dominican nun, and then toward the end of his life, the Dominican sisters were helping to take care of him. So in appreciation, he designed this chapel. At first, he was just going to design the window, but then he also added these areas, which were then, he designed them, and then they were made into tiles. Now, an interesting thing about stained glass windows, I always have to throw some craft stuff in here. During the medieval period, stained glass windows were really popular. And the symbolism is, as the light came through the window, it would change color, and you see it projecting on the wall. and this would happen without breaking the glass. And so the symbolism was the Immaculate Conception, how Mary became pregnant, miraculously. So the stained glass is not only beautiful, it's also, communicating that
So,
message.
so we've learned a good bit about Matisse, but is there something that would surprise us that we haven't yet heard?
Oh, that we haven't yet heard? Uh-oh.
Mm-hmm.
Well, things that we have heard. I was surprised that he left his successful law career to become an artist. That was a very brave thing to do. But also the fact that he wanted to make art to comfort people, to be relaxed, and he didn't really want people to understand his struggle, and it all looks easy. How many of you have heard the joke of, someone in a museum and they're looking at a piece and they say to the artist, well, how long did it take you to do that? And the artist says, however old he is, 50 years or whatever, because it's the accumulated knowledge and, your talent. And so, yeah, these pieces look simple, but you've seen, the progression and kind of the evolution of it. And let's see. Okay, next question.
So Matisse lived from, I believe it was 1860s to 1954. So he had quite a long life. As we, get closer to closing out, why does Matisse matter to us today?
Well, he was so influential, not only on his, the painters that were alive at the time, but especially in graphic art today. This is a poster he designed for one of his exhibits. And we're used to seeing these really bold colors. And in fact, what he did here, if you put a warm color next to a cool color, it usually kind of vibrates. And I don't know if you see that red, is it kind of vibrating for you a little bit? But
that could be the alcohol for this.
Oh. Well, but yeah, it looks, very simple and bold, and yeah, so he contributed a lot to, even the poster behind you, Overton County Arts, he would have really liked that. The simple shapes, the, graphic qualities.
Good job, Darren Oliver.
Darren Oliver. Yeah.
So as we close out tonight, if we all wanted to do a big field trip, where might we go to see his art, maybe nearby or abroad?
Well, I've shown you pieces from mostly American museums. He has pieces in a lot of major museums, but fortunately, and Zach found this, the Frist in Nashville is going to have an exhibit opening February 26th. Impressionism through, yeah, and it includes a lot of different artists and Matisse. So I'm looking forward to going to that. It's pretty close.
Yeah.
But,
and I believe also at the High Museum in Atlanta, is that right?
Yeah, they're just about any museum you can think of. They have Matisse paintings or sketches or prints or sculptures. The nice thing about sculpture, you usually have multiples.
Okay. So I guess we'll all load up on a bus and head to the Frist on February 26th. Thank you, Carol, for this wonderful conversation. It was a pleasure to interview you, and we hope you all learned something, and we'll visit the Frist and hang out and talk and maybe have another tasty beverage.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. I retired 3 years ago from teaching art history at Tech, but I do enjoy, a captive audience. So.
The doors were locked whenever you all came in.
Thank you, guys.